Umurangi Generation is a cyberpunk photography game released in May 2020 by Maori developer Neftali Faulkner. It takes place in a futuristic Tauranga e Taroa, in what Faulkner calls a shitty future. Umurangi Generation is a game that is deeply influenced by modern crisis, climate change, capitalist exploitation, and the rise of fascism. Neftali Faulkner has stated in interviews that Umurangi Generation was inspired by the wildfires that raged through Australia in the summer of 2020, especially the response of the Australian government and corporations. There was a lot of talk about what happened, but not what caused it: climate change. This frustration with the failures of neoliberalism guides the whole design of the game. Umurangi Generation uses gameplay systems and environmental storytelling to build a consistent science fiction world which critiques neoliberal responses to climate and economic crisis. The unnamed player character is a Maori teenager struggling through late-stage capitalist hustle culture, a UN neo-colonial occupation, police violence, and governmental inaction on a looming existential threat. The gameplay consists of taking photo bounties for the Tauranga Express. The player is given 7 things to photograph and then reach the end. If a player falls off the map or hits a hazard, they spawn at a safe place, negating a fail state. The genre of photography games and the chill music encourage the player to take in the world-building details at their own pace. Unlike a film where the mise-en-scène is confined to a single rectangular window, the player is free to look at this large multi-level diorama frozen in time at any angle through the camera. The player is not looking through a singular authoritative view of the world, rather they are able to creatively interpret the world through photography, encouraging engagement with environmental details. There is a 10-minute time limit tied to the side objectives for extra rewards, requiring the player to speed run through a level, collecting all the photos and film canisters as fast as possible for things like new lenses or a jetpack. This sacrificing of creative freedom to meet the arbitrary constraints of a corporate checklist can result in a small emergent narrative that the player can experience on their own. A critique of how capitalist culture takes away our creativity, time, and ability to see the world clearly. World building through gameplay can be seen in the way the game handles blue bottle jellyfish. The player is penalized for including them in the shot. Not only is it a gameplay challenge to try and keep things out of the photo as well as have things in, if you're paying attention, it's a clue. Halfway through the game, there is a level that depicts an attack on Otameitai, the military base from the second level. Soldiers are shooting at an unseen foe, and there are giant blue bottles covering most of the map. If you take a picture and turn the exposure all the way up, you see for the first time the monster depicted in graffiti in newspapers. A kaiju that looks a lot like those jellyfish you aren't supposed to photograph. Like how liberal media outlets report on extreme weather events without mentioning climate change, the magazine you are working for won't pay you for reminding people of the cause of the problem. You can capture the destruction or the human suffering, but not the truth. You're allowed to talk about the smoke, but not the fire. Unlike the narrative delivery of most other video games, there is no dialogue, no opening text crawl, not even an opening cutscene. Without guidance, the player is forced to determine the setting and narrative through embedded environmental storytelling. The framing of the photography game allows Umurangi Generation to fully invest in this kind of hands-off storytelling. The walls that surround the city, the fighter jets screaming overhead should be an early tip that this isn't just a fun game where you can take selfies with a penguin. In Kati Kati, gunfire can be heard in the distance while signs advertise services to soundproof your home. Neoliberalism can't solve the problem, but it can sell you a way to ignore it. The UN is held in contempt by the population, and the giant robots they throw at the monster problem are woefully insufficient. In Umurangi Generation, there is no challenge curve. The player does not get better at fighting or puzzle solving. The player gets better at seeing, at drawing connections between these disparate points of information to build a cohesive whole. Depending on how skilled the player is at noticing the world building, the fact that it's a story about the end of the world will either be a surprise or seem like the natural consequence of a neoliberal society that prioritizes profiteering from and deflecting responsibility for the crisis it creates over the lives of its citizens, settler or indigenous. Umurangi Generation draws on Maori culture as a source of beauty, strength, and resistance. Faulkner is from the Ngai Tirangaiwa tribe of the Maori people and ties that perspective into the game. The name Umurangi is Te Roa for red sky, a reference to the effect that the Australian wildfires had that caused an orange haze to hang in the air for miles around. The names of the levels give the Te Roa names for places, in an act of linguistic reclamation. The feathers of the extinct and sacred hua bird are constant motifs. Through the use of the hua feather in graffiti or the costumes of the characters, Umurangi Generation displays how artistic expression ensures the survival of indigenous knowledge and culture. The hua are gone, but their feathers and what they represent are treasured and passed down through the generations to this very day. The world may be on fire, but young people still dance, form connections, and make art. They survive. This may be an apocalyptic story, but the Maori have endured the destruction of their world before. In the face of this indigenous resilience, the bleakness of the original ending conveys, if not hope, then solidarity. The player stands with the spirits of Maori elders, equal to the birds and crabs, to witness the end of the world together, quietly mourning the burdens of the Umurangi generation, contemptuous of those that chose not to save them.